Well, welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 8 of The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, 2 Narrow Escapes.
This one is thick with twists and turns. A lot of exciting stuff happens.
Because of like the snake? Is that, sorry, that's like one of your jokes, I feel like. We got 2 narrow escapes here. Again, Lewis right off the bat is just telling us, here's what we got going on in this chapter.
Yes.
Are you enjoying that? Because last time it was how the adventure ended.
I think it's an interesting move to put 2 narrow escapes in the same chapter, but I like it.
Well, we have so much to get into with this chapter. Let's go ahead and jump to the chapter summary. I guess before we can do that, we've got to say where we were last time. In the last chapter, Eustace was undragoned by Aslan. He's become a much more likable person on the ship, and that's where we pick up today. So do you got the chapter summary for us, Phil?
I do. The entire crew is in good spirits as they sail towards a land that was seen from the air when Eustace was in dragon form. Before they get there, a sea monster circles the Dawn Treader and nearly shatters the vessel. But thanks to Reepicheep's guidance, they narrowly escape. Several days later, they land and find the remnants of someone's clothes, sword, and armor, but with signs of decay. Looking around, Reepicheep and Lucy spot a gold statue of a man at the bottom of the pool. When testing the depth, Edmund realizes that whatever enters the water turns to gold. Caspian claims it for Narnia, which causes a conflict with Edmund, and just when Lucy steps in, they all turn and see Aslan at a distance, shaking the group into a clear state of mind. They head back on board and leave the island, naming it Deathwater.
Very nice. So much is happening in these chapters. I mean, you couldn't even include Burnt Island. That's not like a knock on you. I mean, it wouldn't have fit.
Yeah, I wrote what I thought was going to be the most succinct way, and then I had to trim out another 18 words.
Yeah.
Because there's just so much in these chapters these days.
I don't think I'd ever noticed that before, just how dense this book is, how much happens. I think it's because of this episodic storytelling.
Yes, and we have the privilege of working with characters that are already established.
Very true. Well, what were some of your initial takeaways, reactions to this chapter?
I love how quickly they seem to be moving, even though there are several days in between everything. Mm-hmm. He skips over some of that part, which keeps the plot at a very good pace.
Yeah, I think my initial reaction, it had nothing to do with the story, but I want to tell you a story. Tonight, I was getting ready to record this episode. You were coming over. I wanted to reread the chapter just one last time. It's a nice, cool, I'm painting the picture for you, Phil. And it's a cool evening here. I put some tea on. I put my sweater on. I have one light in the living room. And usually I read on my Kindle. I went to the bookshelf and I pulled the book off the shelf. The book that you're actually right now using because you left your copy at home. And sorry to out you on the air. So I go to read this, and because I have the Kindle, I don't ever really see exactly where we are in the book. And so I'm flipping to chapter 8. And I get there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we're more than halfway through this book. And I got really sad. I feel like this has gone by so quickly, more than either the first or the second season. I keep feeling like we just started. The way that this serialized storytelling has gone, I'm like, oh my gosh, we're this far already, and I don't want it to be over. I do not want this journey of the Dawn Treader to be over. Just
imagine next book, because then we will truly be halfway through the entire series.
The entire series, well, that is hard to believe. But yeah, and I was sad just because I've loved covering this, and I mean, we still have a lot more to go. But it did make me think a lot about this story, just how fast-paced it is. And the fact that in this chapter itself, chapter 8 here, we have 2, pretty fully formed stories. They're both quick. They're both short. But I don't feel as if either one is lacking with either I think the 2, the Sea Serpent and Gold or Deathwater. It's Deathwater, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The last one.
Yeah. With both of them, I don't feel like, I wish I'd spent more time there. I think Lewis has done a really good thing where he kind of, we have a big main story and then like another chapter of just kind of here's some of the little adventures and then another big story and then some more little adventures. So we just came from this 3 chapters on Eustace as a dragon. That whole thing was about 3 chapters-ish long with 4, 6, and 7, and then or 5. I can't count. 5, 6, and 7, and then here 8. 8 is kind of like a little bridge between you just had this last big chapter on Dragon Island, and then I can't talk about next time, but we're going into another adventure that'll take more than one chapter to get through.
Okay.
So I love that. I'm loving this book. I know that's the most boring form of podcasting for me to just sit here and be like, I really like this guy, but I do. I love it.
Yeah. And I also think the structure of this book in particular would work really well for an episodic treatment, say on Netflix.
Yes, I think
Because you could have that longer plot over 3 chapters, and that could work as either a longer episode, because now we don't have to stick to the 50 minutes anymore. It could be an hour and a half sometimes. We could do that, but we could also have a more action-packed one like this chapter 8, that would move things along and kind of break up the longer stuff too.
I think this book will work way better as a TV show than a movie, if that's the way they decide to go. And we'll have to talk. We're going to talk about that in the Dancing Lawn this month, because it's 2020. We've got this whole decade of Narnia to look out, and so we're going to be talking about what are the best and worst case scenarios for this decade, because when it comes to stuff like Narnia on Netflix and whatnot. But that's not what we're doing now. So let's go ahead and start our read through here. Well, the chapter begins kind of the way that chapter 5 began. They had left the Lone Islands, and we get kind of a little calm before, and that one it was before a literal storm. And again, it goes back to everyone's cheerful again as the Dawn Treader sails away from Dragon Island. They play chess or something? Is then that happen?
They do, yeah. Two games of chess, yeah.
Phil's a big chess player.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know,
his dad is Bobby Fischer.
No, but he is pretty good. Still haven't been able to.
Your dad or
win.
Bobby Fischer? Which one's good?
They're both good.
Yeah.
I think Bobby Fischer is better, but that.
Now he played Spider-Man in the Spider-Man movies. Is that am I getting? No one's gonna follow. I'll stop.
Yeah, it is fun to see chess mentioned a few times, and when they talk about how Eustace kind of reverts to his old self when he's losing, he lost a couple games. That definitely happens. I find myself reacting in weird ways that I didn't know I was going to react. Like I'm back to being a kid, and I'm upset that I lost a game. Or
yeah, I've seen you flip the board and just throw pieces at the wall.
I'm not playing on a board, so you know that's not true.
Well, I told you that's not. You've been playing it wrong this whole time. You play on a trampoline, and I don't know why you do that. Do you play online?
Makes it more exciting. Yeah,
okay.
I play online.
Okay. What's funny is in the midst of these they're not even misadventures. This just kind of monotonous sea traveling. They even land on an island, and Lewis tells us about it, which I love this. He gives us a couple of paragraphs here about this island, which really isn't remarkable and just has this little boat on it that, Reepicheep finds. And I think what's so great, even about that little aside about this boat that Reepicheep finds, is that the way that Lewis writes, as a first-time reader, you either read this and you're like, maybe that's foreshadowing something, and that's why Lewis mentioned it, or Lewis just likes to world build with little details like that, so it's just world building. And so you have no idea what he's doing with it.
The note that I made was that this is the kind of mundane detail that works really well in a story. Mm-hmm. You go back 150 years, you have entire novels that are full of details like this that are not necessarily needed for the plot, but they're fun to have, and reading a book was a lot different back then. I imagine it lasted a lot longer. And you spent more time reading it, so the details were very fun. Now the books seem to be a little bit shorter just because of, I think that publishers think the attention spans aren't as much. But Lord of the Rings has a lot of great detail, but it's so thoroughly thought out, it's rather enjoyable. With this, I think that if he went on too much longer, it would be annoying. But because he just included a little bit of a detail, they get on an island, they find this little boat, Reepicheep puts it back on board, not a ton happens, but it makes it feel realistic.
That's an interesting point. I never thought of it like that before. I've been thinking about the differences. You mentioned Lord of the Rings. I mean, obviously we talk about Tolkien and Lewis a lot on here. I've been thinking about the ways that they do world build differently, and one of the ones I hadn't really thought about before is their difference in micro and macro world building. Tolkien's approach is so genius because he does both. He builds things on a very large scale, but then he also does world building on a small scale too. And this, and here's the, as the hobbits are leaving the Shire, there's just world building of what they're seeing in some of the ruins. So it's kind of like small details, and there's also the huge details of here's, Arnor, or, he'll get into all the history of something as well too. Lewis doesn't do a lot as much of the macro world building. Most of his stuff is in the micro details like this, which still is really good world building. It feels very lived in.
Right.
I think of a movie we never talk about here ever before called Star Wars, and one of the things that people talked about with the original was that it felt like a lived-in world. I mean, science fiction, people were so used to it being shiny. Not all, but usually
Everything was shiny and new.
And he went for this kind of lived-in. Everything was used or was kind of scuffed up and stuff, and it makes it feel. I mean, for it's a very different medium, cinema. But what he was going for is this idea of like people have lived here for a while. It's kind of those small details, and he doesn't do as much of the macro world building in that first movie either. You don't really know. You hear about the Senate, but you're like, I don't really know what that is, right?
Yeah.
And
that was one of the complaints about the prequels is that everything was so shiny and new. And I think one of the things people liked about the episodes 4, 5, and 6 was that everything looked kind of run down and beat up a little bit.
And even when it comes to this idea of macro and micro world building, the prequels are much more macro. You have a much better idea of where the galaxy is, and then you don't necessarily. We can figure it now because we have all the books and stuff. But in the original trilogy, it just isn't. You don't necessarily really know all that's happening on all the other planets and worlds. But we're talking too much about Star Wars, so we gotta.
Well, I think what we're talking about is we like a world that is lived in and that has a few mundane details to anchor us. I think fiction is a lie in a good way. It's a lie that can sometimes tell us the truth, but to make it a convincing lie, adding some details like the fact that they got it on an island, wasn't a ton there, and they took a little prop back. That makes it even more convincing, because if there was something cool happening every single time, that is a little harder to believe for some reason.
And no one wants to read a book that's that plot driven, right?
Right.
Where every single scene, everything that happens is just about moving the plot forward. And literally, that could be a way that Lewis could have gone here, because this is a book where, I mean, it's a road trip book. That's what it is, right?
Yeah.
they're I mean, it's not really road trip, but
Water trip.
it is it's a voyage. And because of that, it could be, it could be this kind of epic story where every single place they go to, something important always happens. And that is mostly how it works, because that's what we want to read. But small details like this, and like some of the other stuff they've come across where, Reepicheep finds this boat, or they find just a little bit about this island, it's not there to move the plot along, and it gives us a moment to pause and to just appreciate the world that we're in and not just the plot things. I don't know about you, but when I'm reading Edmund as a dragon on Dragon Island, I'm not thinking as much about the whole...
Say that one more time.
Did I say Edmund again?
Yep.
You know what I meant, Eustace, sorry. I'm not thinking as much about the world of Narnia. I'm thinking about this big plot-centric thing. I'm thinking about Aslan. I'm thinking about, what does this mean for our characters? What message is Lewis conveying here through this undragoning? When we get to the smaller stuff, I'm thinking more about, I love this world. I love being here. I want to go to Narnia myself. And it's these smaller moments that do that for me. And I feel like we moved past them way too quickly. So I'm glad we spent, I don't know, however long it is here. Let's move on. Any other thoughts about this before we go to the sea serpent?
Let's get to the sea serpent. I think that's what everyone wants to hear about.
Go for it.
I love the way it's presented, and they think there are rocks, but then one of the rocks disappears, and then another rock appears somewhere. And Lewis has this incredible knack for revealing stuff where you as the reader think that you figured out what it is right before he tells you, and you're proud of yourself, but you also are in a good way tricked into feeling like one of the characters might by being on the boat. He gives a few details, a few more details, and then explains what it is just in case you didn't get it. And that reveal is so powerful.
It's really frightening too.
It's terrifying when it rises up in front of them.
And it's chasing them down from the stern. And it's a really just well written passage here.
Yeah. I'm also excited to see this scene on film, because you told me that something else wasn't that great, I'm also not excited to see it.
Yeah, it's I don't want to talk too much about the movie version. I will just say it is very, very different, and I really, really don't like it. I will say that, and I will move on. There's other parts of this movie that I actually rather enjoy. I'm not someone who hates The Dawn Treader as a movie, but this part I really don't like.
What else stood out to you about the sea serpent?
I thought we got some really great character development here for both Eustace. My goodness. I want to put it up on the wall so I just not say the two or something. Great character development from both Eustace and Reepicheep. And I loved this because one of the great things about this book that is really drawing me in is that I feel like every single character is on an arc right now. All of our main characters, Caspian.
It's just regular shit.
And you're very funny. Edmund, Eustace, Lucy, and now Reepicheep as well too. Am I forgetting anybody? Caspian? They're all on a different character arc right now. ARC, not ARK.
Got it.
Does that make sense now? And one of the things that goes through Eustace, which is, I think, much more apparent here, is remember, he takes out Caspian's sword, his second best sword, and he is the first to attack the sea serpent.
Yeah.
This
Which
is a guy
completely different change.
Yeah, I mean, he was like, remember, I'm a pacifist. I don't fight. Also, he was a coward in those first couple of chapters, and he is the first one there attacking the sea serpent. I mean, that we don't even really like to dive into that too much. That's a big change in his character.
Because I've spent so much time in this chapter today, I just had more time to prepare, and I spent so much time seeing Eustace in this chapter that now that you bring it up, I am surprised because I've already gotten used to him being better.
Sure.
And even when he kind of messes up after playing chess, we forget, like, he wasn't that bad, and he was terrible several chapters ago.
Oh, yeah. The other one from me, Reepicheep here, he says, don't fight, push, as the sea serpent is kind of starting to strangle the ship. It's wrapping itself around the ship. He's like, don't fight, we've got to push. And they're trying to push it off the stern so that it can, so the Dawn Treader can get away. That's a big deal for him to say. Yep. Reepicheep is very chivalrous, but he also is not a mouse who will back away from a fight. That's cowardly to him. And yet, I think Lewis is very specific in using the words "don't fight." He doesn't say like "don't attack." It's fight, which we've heard Reepicheep talk a lot about fighting very often. I mean, we're always there to avenge somebody or to
We'll see that later.
Yeah, exactly. Later in this chapter, he's like, we're going to avenge somebody, and so he says, "Don't fight, push." He is doing what's best for the ship and not necessarily what he wants to do. It's actually for him. This is almost an act of selflessness to not fight and be like, well, let me take out my sword and start fighting. Instead, I'm going to push because that's what's best. And he can't really help. Another thing that's big for him here, he's still small, but his sword can do a lot more damage than his little mouse body can do as he tries to push. And Lewis even tells us that he's really not doing much until the rest of the crew join him to push the serpent off.
But he was still instrumental in
getting people to do
telling people what to do and demonstrating what to do, and even in his weakness, leading a group.
Yeah, and so that's what really stuck out to me. The only other thing is, at one point, Lewis says that the sea serpent is the length of a cricket pitch away. I know many people are probably dying to know how far that is. It is 22 yards by 10 feet. I don't think the width actually matters, so it is 20.
I thought you were going to tell me in meters. I was about to flip out.
It's
how many meters is that?
20.12.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, I know no one cares.
Yeah, meters aren't based on anything.
Yeah, but it's about 22 yards away. Do you know how many feet that is, Phil?
22 yards?
Yeah.
Let me see, do the math, carry the 166.
John, yes, you were correct. 22 times 3 is 66.
Yeah.
So they do get away as they're pushing off the sea serpent. I cannot, that's a hard word for me to say.
Sea serpent.
It joins the list of things. I like that our show now has...
She sells sea serpents by the seashore.
I do appreciate that our show has inside jokes now where, they're all at my expense, I feel like. Daniel can't pronounce words. That's like an ongoing...
It's pronounce.
Don't do that. That's a reoccurring theme for the show, is Daniel not being able to pronounce words. The sea serpent, as it is
they kind of throw you to the wolves.
Stop. The sea serpent escapes. Let's move on. You ready to? Any other thoughts? Those are good thoughts. I appreciate.
Let's get to Goldwater on Deathwater.
Goldwater on Deathwater. That's my favorite James Bond movie, believe it or not.
Oh man, you took away the reference I was gonna make.
Oh, what was yours?
I think that I thought, C.S. Lewis must have seen 007 recently, and then I thought, nope, got the timeline completely mixed up. Goldfinger or Goldeneye probably got it from Lewis. And I don't think either.
I don't think either's related at all.
I think they
we
both got them
just
from someone like 2,000 years ago. But
well, interestingly enough, this book published in 1952 is just 1 year before Ian Fleming wrote the first Bond book, which is Casino Royale. That was 1953. So in no way is it really James Bond. That's weird that we both thought of that. Like it's just
it's so
it's just gold. It has not. It's not like.
But I think there's a person covered in gold.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little closer.
I guess, but it's not like James Bond.
I'm curious where Lewis came up with this idea. Like what influenced it?
I mean, I would think it would be Midas, right? From Greek mythology. That was 100% where I was thinking.
Yeah, so I grew up, I also thought of Midas, but I wasn't sure when that was. Because to me, that seems like in the 500s AD. But
no, way before that. This is a Greek myth.
This goes back that far.
Oh, yeah.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, Midas. So remember, Midas is whatever he touches turns to gold. As a key. So yeah, it's part of Greek mythology. Yeah. So it's BC.
Cool. Yeah, that story really, for some reason, I think had a big impact on me. It just showed me that not all that glitters is gold. Not everything that is
wrong author
producing wealth like that is necessarily going to be a good thing. So once they're on what we will later call Deathwater Island, they discover quite a few things, including some old rusty armor, old rusty sword, and they're not sure what happened because at first they think, oh, someone has been killed, but the scene doesn't make sense for that.
Yeah.
And Reepicheep is all ready to avenge, but he doesn't get a chance because they find a body in the bottom of the water, but it's gold. And I believe Edmund is very sure that it's going to be too heavy to pull out. And you just think about that. Have you ever picked up like a kettlebell or like metal is very, very heavy. We're not used to picking things up that are solid metal. Mm-hmm. Most of it is plastic that has a metal appearance or coating, or only a little bit of metal. So they try to test the depth. The thing is, I'm not sure why they're trying to test.
Yeah, well, that's a good idea. I mean, that's a good question. Let's even pause there because I want to dive into all these things that they find. Yeah. I think there's a lot of important.
Pun intended.
Yeah. There's a lot of great things here. One thing I just want to say as an aside is Lewis said they find a few coins, and Lewis says not Calorman crescents, but genuine Narnian lions and trees, such as you might see any day in the marketplace of Beaver's Dam or Baruna. And I wanted to bring this up because we actually had a listener reach out to us on Twitter that asked a really great question about Mr. Tumnus. So again, this do relate because we just heard about the marketplace at Beaver's Dam in Baruna. And the listener said, just curious, have you ever wondered where Mr. Tumnus gets his parcels? Since there don't seem to be any shops or where he or anyone gets food since it's been winter for 100 years and they never show anyone farming. So we'll focus on that first part, which is, when we first, back in chapter 1 of Wardrobe, we meet Tumnus. He's got these parcels with him in the umbrella, right, as he's going through the snowy landscape. And that's a great question. Where, was he going from the store? There doesn't really seem to be any stores. And my response had just been something along the lines of, we actually learned that Lewis had a couple of different images of Narnia before he even started creating this world. And one of them was, a lamppost in the snowy scene. And another had to do with seeing this fawn with an umbrella and just some packages. And so I think that kind of came first, and then Lewis kind of, filled in the rest
world around it.
But some other people had, other questions that kind of jumped in talking about we had Daniel Hamilton thought that he always thought maybe the witch set up trade with the Calormans or other countries outside, since it seems the perpetual winter is only specific to Narnia, which is another good idea. So it's just kind of a question. I just really wanted to hear your thoughts. We'll never know exactly.
And I think this might be one of the things that Lewis chose to leave out because it doesn't directly affect anything.
We have no idea.
No one else needs to go shopping, and you don't really see that in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Yeah,
and just in that book. I mean, because then when we do learn more about Baruna and Caspian, it would make sense as Aslan's, going about in that, I think in the penultimate chapter there, and he's kind of having people join in on this thing, and he's scaring off some of the bad guys there. It would make sense to find a market there, which we hear, market at Baruna. Yeah. I mean, a market at Beaver's Dam, obviously this is thousands of years after wardrobe, but I can't imagine. It just doesn't seem in wardrobe that there would be shops. It's mostly like animals living animal lives. Oh, and they can talk. Like that's
the fawn Tumnus, however, has a bunch of books.
Oh, that is weird. Yeah, he has all those books.
Which makes me think
he went to
about
school
a
for
printing
geography.
press.
Oh, man.
But a printing press would lead to a proliferation of ideas, which doesn't seem to match with the White Witch being in charge for so long.
Yeah. I think this is one of the things that if we really dive into it, it just isn't enjoyable anymore. I think it's a fun question to ask.
It's fun to think about.
Oh, absolutely. But I do think some of that stuff just doesn't. And this is the kind of stuff that Tolkien hated, right? He's like, this doesn't make sense when you really think about it. But I love that about Narnia. I don't need it to all make sense. It's fine with me. But I just wanted to mention that because it just so happened that we got this this tweet at the same time as we're doing this chapter, which mentions a marketplace. So we know they exist at least in this time. And at the Lone Islands, they were selling slaves, and so that was a bad marketplace, but it was one nonetheless. And so I guess at this point it all has been established. I wonder if that's something. It would be interesting to think about this. Is it something that's established by the Telmarines? Do the Telmarines come in and they bring these things with them? Because they're humans from our world originally. Do they bring these ideas of economy with them?
Yeah. And another possibility could the packages themselves start to make me think. I wonder if Tumnus has read a lot and he thinks that he needs to wrap things in packages for some reason. I'm just a thought, but the more I think about it, it doesn't quite make sense.
It's a great image, but it doesn't. Yeah, it
is a great
gift for
image.
people, or that. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
but it's fun nonetheless. I love talking about this kind of stuff. But so they do find out, right, that this is one of, going back to the island here, that this is one of the lords. At least they can make the assumption. We don't know which one it is. We won't find out for a while, but we do know this is one of the lords here. And this is where Reepicheep does speak up about, well, we've got to find out how to avenge him, you know. Yeah. And I want to focus here on, I want to kind of extend my thesis from the last chapter. In the last chapter, in chapter, 7? Yeah, 7, I talked a lot about how I really was seeing Lewis point out this idea of stories. And it goes a little bit further in this chapter too. And as I've been thinking about it a lot, it just stuck out to me. So Lewis writes this as they're trying to kind of figure out, hey, what's happened here? He says this about Edmund. Edmund, the only one of the party who had read several detective stories, had meanwhile been thinking. And that's its own paragraph. We got a one-sentence paragraph right there. And this idea, as I was reading it, a couple of days ago, for the first time I was reading it, just stood out to me again. This idea of stories. And it's this, Lewis is continually painting these characters as, well, they read this thing, and so now they are this way. Mm-hmm. Edmund has read detective stories, and so he's going to be able to uncover some clues here. Eustace had not read things about dragons, so he doesn't know what a dragon looks like. Right? Reepicheep has read many stories, or at least experienced many stories, and so he's able to use them to comfort, to be a comforter. And I really just am hearing Lewis say to me as I read this that, stories are formative. I don't think many people would disagree with that idea, right? The idea of stories being formative in us, but I'd never seen this theme here in Dawn Treader. I think about it, if I watch a certain amount of movies or read a number of books that are all very similar, I start, not necessarily becoming that character, but ideas that are there. It starts to shape me a little bit, and that's one of the reasons that God has chosen to reveal Himself through this story of Scripture. Right? The hopefully the goal is for me as a believer is that the more and more I'm reading the Bible, I'm being shaped by that one true story, as Lewis would say, the true myth. Right? Yeah. The idea of the gospel. It
happens quickly too. I read this chapter twice today, and I also read for quite a while in Lord of the Rings.
You read 2 fiction books today.
I did. Aren't you proud of me?
Yeah, I'm very proud of you.
And then I went for a walk in the woods. And
where'd you go to the woods around here?
Near the train tracks.
Oh, okay, that sounds creepy.
It does, but it's a really nice area. And I'm walking.
Safe? Are you okay? Do you have like a vest or something?
It was 2:00.
Okay, I'm just making sure. I want you to be okay.
I'm walking around and having primed my mind with 2 fiction stories that both have quite a few forest scenes.
Mm-hmm.
It was quite fun to walk around.
Yeah.
And you are imagining stuff.
Because you've read these imaginative stories, your
Yeah.
imagination has been sparked. Yes.
I think we're aware of the impact that stories have.
The stories have an incredible impact on us. Yes.
We see that so much in these books with Lewis.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful for it because he read a lot. We found that out. And he remembered almost everything he read, it sounds like, too.
Yeah. Well, let's move on. We've spent a lot of time here. We still have a lot more to go in this chapter. We got
do.
a really big scene coming up.
So once they realize that the water turns stuff to gold, what happens?
So they realized that the Lord must have somehow tried to go swim in the lake, had turned himself to gold, and died. And they realized, wow, we've got kind of a really special thing on our hands. And this is what C.S. Lewis writes. The king who owned this island, said Caspian slowly, and his face flushed as he spoke, would soon be the richest of all kings of the world. I claim this land forever as Narnian possession. It shall be called Goldwater Island. And I bind all of you to secrecy. No one must know of this, not even Drenian. On pain of death, do you hear? Who are you talking to? Said Edmund. I'm no subject of yours. If anything, it's the other way around. I'm one of the 4 ancient sovereigns of Narnia, and you are under no allegiance to the High King, my brother. So it has come to that, King Edmund, has it? Said Caspian, laying his hand on his sword hilt. Oh, stop it, both of you, said Lucy. That's the worst of doing anything with boys. You're all such swaggering, bullying idiots. Ooh! Her voice died away into a gasp, and everyone else saw what she had seen. We'll pick up that part in a minute.
I definitely see what you're talking about with Lucy now, especially having you read it in that voice.
Yeah, and I think there's a really great quote from Mere Christianity that I want to read again. I'm reading a lot right now, so just prepare yourself. I don't think anyone's going to be upset, though, that they're going to hear more of C.S. Lewis. So in Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis talks a lot about pride, and if anybody has not listened to Pints with Jack, both Matt and David did a great job in that episode where they I can't remember which chapter it is, but I'll post in a link for people to check out when they covered Lewis's thoughts on pride when he really dives into that in Mere Christianity. Here's one of the things he says on page 122. We say that people are proud of being rich or clever or good looking, but they are not. They are proud of being richer or cleverer or better looking than others. If anyone else became equally rich, or clever, or good-looking, there would be nothing to be proud about. It is the comparison that would make you proud, the pleasure of being above the rest. That's what's happening here, right? This isn't, I don't think Caspian, Edmund, or Lucy, well, we'll get to Lucy in a minute, but Caspian and Edmund, as they fight here, they don't necessarily want gold just because they want to be rich. Caspian says, the king who owned this land would soon be the richest of all the kings in the world. And Edmund is, who are you talking to? I'm no subject of yours. It doesn't seem that Edmund necessarily wants the gold. He's just appalled that Caspian would tell him what to do.
Yeah.
They both just they want to be better. And so I was thinking about them too, and I think that stands out quite a bit. And like you said earlier, I wasn't thinking much about Lucy at all until I picked up Devin Brown's Inside the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, and here's what Brown writes. This same greed, he's speaking about Caspian and Edmund, this same greed for superiority can be seen in Lucy's disparaging comment, that's the worst of doing anything with boys, you're all such swaggering, bullying idiots. Whether we called this sin a greed for superiority or simply pride, it was present in a huge measure in Eustace before his meeting with Aslan. And in this fact we can find a unifying element in Aslan's 2 appearances so far. After appearing in Chapter 7 to free Eustace from his sin, Aslan now appears to fulfill the same role for Caspian, Edmund, and Lucy. So that kind of spoils what's about to happen, but I think it's the good segue.
Yeah.
So do you see what I'm saying, though, about Lucy that, or not me, what Devin Brown is saying about Lucy as being part of this? Like, she's being disparaging towards them. That's not really how Lucy usually talks to people.
Right. I was going to say, it's one thing for her to point out that 2 people are behaving poorly, but she goes above and beyond her usual self.
And makes a broad generalization, not just about them 2, but about all boys in this situation, right?
Right.
So let's jump back again now to the text of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, where Aslan has now appeared.
I'll read it. Across the gray hillside above them, gray, for the heather was not yet in bloom, without noise and without looking at them, and shining as if he were in bright sunlight, though the sun had in fact gone in, passed with slow pace the hugest lion that human eyes had ever seen. In describing the scene, Lucy said afterwards, "He was the size of an elephant," though at another time she only said, "the size of a cart horse." But it was not the size that mattered. Nobody dared to ask what it was. They knew it was Aslan.
So again, we have a very unique appearance by Aslan. Aslan has not technically talked at all in this book so far, right? Because even when he's with Eustace, Eustace knows what he's saying, but he's not really talking to him.
He communicates without saying a word.
So before we really dive into this passage itself, my biggest question for you, Phil, is why do you think, and I don't have an answer myself, why do you think Aslan is working behind the scenes like this? I mean, he's really not a large part of the story so far. That's different than what we've experienced before.
I think for some of the initial changes, especially with Edmund and Lucy and Peter and Susan, who are no longer in Narnia, but
they're no longer with us.
They're no longer with us. They're still affected by him. I think that Aslan spoke to them very plainly, and now he's serving as more of a reminder at key moments. So he doesn't need to say it. They already know. He's just showing up and the equivalent of popping in their head because they look up and they see him. That's my guess anyway. What's yours?
So wait, so what you're saying, what I'm hearing is this is kind of part of their just development as people, right? That as they're growing up, Aslan doesn't need to be right there as much, and so
he doesn't need to explain everything.
Interesting. Okay.
Completely every time. They already know, and we have people like Edmund helping people similar to Eustace, where he's using his experience and passing it on.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like a pyramid scheme, or
Aslan is delegating. That's good.
Yeah, no, that's great. Any other parts of the passage you want to talk about here that you read?
One thing that stands out to me is the way everyone corrects themselves after seeing Aslan. Mm-hmm. Caspian is aware that he has been, to keep this PG, he's been a jerk.
Yeah.
And I think everyone is just, the presence of Aslan puts everybody back on a good path.
Well, in that, when they kind of come to and realize they've all, been acting very foolish, there's like this element of forgetfulness, right? Mm-hmm. That they don't really remember as they go back to the ship as we move ahead in the chapter a little bit. Drinian's like they're like even acknowledges they're acting very weird. They don't seem to remember much of what happened, and it seems like they kind of forget this whole incident in a way, right? And my question is then, was this kind of fit of pride that they all had? This for Lucy, Caspian, and Edmund. Oh my goodness, Lucy, Caspian. No, I was right. I was actually right that time. I was so used to being wrong. I actually named all the three characters correctly. This fit of pride that all three of them had, was this the true them, their true self, or was this some kind of spell that they were under? What do you think's is this the island itself is bringing this out of them? This is who they really are. Is this no? They are sinners. They have total depravity, if you will. Right? Is that what's happening here? Right? Or is it? We're not going to dive into all that. But or is this no? They're under a spell.
I don't think they're under a spell. I think that they're all sinful, and the presence of Aslan helps them get back on a good track. But it doesn't change the fact that their sinfulness was revealed.
So this is not a spell.
I believe the island is cursed, but that can mean a lot of things. I don't think it's a supernatural curse. I think that the way everything is set up reveals greed in certain people or anger in other people.
Yeah, I think I'm the opposite. I think this is some kind of magic that is taking what's already there. So I guess I'm more like kind of using both of those answers, where yes, Caspian, Lucy, and Edmund, really Edmund and Caspian mostly, have this pride within them, this idea to want to be better than others within them, and some kind of magic on this island is bringing that out more than it usually would come out. And I think my kind of reasoning for that is the way that after Aslan shows up, he kind of, I think someone as strong as Aslan would have to show up to kind of counteract that. That if it was just their regular kind of foolishness or selfishness or pride, they might be able to work some of these things out on their own. Or maybe, I mean, not that Aslan would still maybe need to help, but he wouldn't physically have to show up like he does here.
Yep.
And the whole forgetfulness at the end, maybe that's kind of this whole spell or some kind of magic wearing off of them, and that's why they're not forgetting this. Or maybe it's just Aslan himself just giving them this, I don't want you to remember this kind of thing, and go on your way. I don't know.
Yeah. There's definitely some magic going on with a pool that turns things to gold. So
obviously, yeah.
I'm with you there. I think that in the presence of power like that, and with a temptation that strong, in a way that is a curse. So I think
that's good.
It sounds like
that's really good.
It sounds like we're agreeing on a lot of stuff. I think we're coming at it from slightly different.
Yeah, I think
angles.
it's also fun when we don't disagree. So
when we don't disagree.
Yeah. Oh, oh my God. When we do disagree, it's late.
It is late. It's a late night edition.
Yeah, well, this is we're recording this at 4 a.m.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
It's 4 a.m. somewhere.
That's very true.
Yeah.
I think it's time to wrap up the show, Phil. I think anything else we want to go at?
I think you did a really good job transitioning from the fighting about the island to the forgetfulness and return to the ship.
Yeah, I think that was a fun one.
Yeah.
So, any last thoughts on this chapter? This was such a big chapter, and it was really fun to cover. I love that we've gotten so much. There's so much for us to discuss, to agree or disagree about. I really feel like we're really enjoying this. I'm enjoying this season.
Yeah, this has been good. I feel like Lewis has built up quite a bit of momentum, and as a result, we have the pleasure of enjoying that momentum.
This is also, we'll talk about this more at the end of this book, but I am usually very adverse to third entries in a series. I don't care if it's a book series, I don't care if it's movie or third season of a television show. I usually just do not like third entries. Like
it's a make or break piece.
I think there's actually really only about a handful of like third movies per se that I actually like. And even with books, I'm a big fan of a sequel, and then after that sequel, I'm usually like, oh, the third one stinks. But here, you're right. This is what's so great about a series and a franchise like this, is that if you do get it right, it's even better because we don't have some of the things I still love. We don't have some of the same levels of world building. We don't have to introduce all these characters. I feel like you mentioned this earlier. We're getting a considerable amount of depth for Caspian, Edmund, Lucy, not as much yet, but I think that's going to happen in another couple chapters. We're getting a lot of depth because we don't have to be reintroduced to them.
Yeah.
Were you sad to not have Eustace be a main part of this after just, fighting that serpent in this chapter?
No, I think it fits really well. We have a respite from a Eustace focus.
Yeah, that's great. So that's about it for this chapter. Next time, we'll be reading chapter 9, The Island of Voices. And in that chapter, believe it or not, the Dawn Treader lands on a mysterious island.
Mysterious island number 19.
Yeah, yes. But before we leave, we do have an email to get to today. So, Phil, I'm going to let you take it away.
This email is from Aaron. Hi, Daniel and Phil. What a delight it's been to journey through the voyage of the Dawn Treader with you this season. I decided to read along with you this time, and it's made the experience even more fun. My friend Hannah, yes, the same Hannah who taught you how to say wolf correctly, Daniel, and I have been reading the chapters on Tuesday evenings in eager anticipation of the episode's release the next morning, which always brightens my commute to work that day. Phil, I cannot imagine how hard it must be to not read on. I know what happens next, and I struggle to put my book back on the shelf for another 2 weeks. The Voyage of the Dawn Treader is my favorite book from the Chronicles of Narnia. Ironically, I remember reading it in middle school and being very bored, unimpressed, and unaffected by it all. I picked it up for the first time in 10 years last year, and was overwhelmed by its symbolism, beauty, and relevance to my relationship with Christ today. I think that I, along with so many other readers, am drawn to the events in Chapter 7 because of the weight of the truth conveyed. This is the brilliance of Lewis's writing on display. Though we likely haven't sold our family out for candy, or turned into a scaly beast, we can read the Chronicles and say, I am Edmund, and I am Eustace, because we know what it feels like to come to the end of our selfish selves, and, painful though it is at first, we know what it feels like to be refined and sanctified by God, for the cure to begin. I love hearing you talk about the significance of Edmund being the one to listen and respond to Eustace's undragoning tale. I can't help but smile when Eustace asks Edmund if he knows Aslan, to which he responds, well, he knows me. I remember at the beginning of the season you alluded to the potential significance of Aslan's country being in the east. I have never given that much consideration before, and so I look forward to hearing your thoughts on that when that time comes. I know Narnia has different constellations and varies from our world in several ways, but I like to think that the sun rises in the east there too, and that's all I'll say about that for now. Thank you all for your hard work, insight, and dad jokes, further up and further in. P.S. I am both shocked and saddened by how many listeners have put down Turkish Delight. That stuff is amazing. My mom bought it for me after we saw the movie together in 2005, and I continue to buy it as a treat every now and then. I implore you both to try some for yourselves so we can settle this debate once and for all. That was from Aaron. Thank you, Aaron.
That was great, yes.
I love that Aaron and Hannah have rearranged their schedule and are reading it at the same pace that we are.
That's kind of fun.
That's
I think
cool.
that's great, yeah. I love her thoughts of I am Edmund, I am Eustace. I don't do the I am Iron Man joke. I know you were about to say it.
No.
Daniel
did it earlier and he edited it out. I'm just going to say that.
Yeah.
Little taste of your own medicine right there.
But but Aaron, I love this because it's such a real thing. One of the great things that C.S. Lewis does is he takes these fantasy stories and he somehow makes them personal for us. Lewis makes fantasy real. And I'm not talking real as in it feels real. Narnia is not real. It's not a real place. Sorry, everybody. It's not a real place. And yet he takes this world that we all know doesn't exist and he makes it real for us. Not the world itself, but some of the things that we can relate to and connect with. We take it back and she talks about, we haven't sold our family out for Turkish Delight, but we have done these other things. We are able to recognize why we need to be undragon. And so I think Erin's really onto something important, and she's really got a good idea of why so many of us keep coming back to these books over and over again. Why so many people keep putting up with this podcast over and over again. Because we just really like these books, and there's no one else to listen to, so we got these two guys, right? Yeah. But it's great. So, Aaron, thank you so much for mentioning that. And yes, we will talk more later on, not now, but we will talk more about the East and the sun and some other stuff. And then, we got to get some Turkish Delight, Phil.
We do.
We got to do it sometime. Maybe on one of the Dancing Along episodes, we'll just, try to get
30
a bunch
minutes
of them. They're not going to eat
of
them
us
in front
eating.
of. I don't want people to hear me eat. I don't know. I already have a hard enough time just listening to my own voice. I do not want to listen to what it sounds like to hear me eat. But we could do that. Maybe get a couple, mute out all the chewing sounds, and unless people want that, maybe that could be a second version. But I do think we got to end here. So
I agree.
Listeners, thanks so much for tuning in. We really appreciate this. We really love doing the show, and we love hearing from listeners. So again, thank you, Aaron, for reaching out. You want me to wrap us up, or you want to do it?
I'll do it. This episode is made possible by our patrons over at patreon.com. If you'd like to support the show, you too can listen to a bonus episode each month along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to Elias Dean, Stephen Page, and Madeline Heising for supporting us at the Care Paravel level. You can follow us into Narnia on our Twitter and Facebook pages, and also email us at thenarniapodcast@gmail.com. We'd also love a voicemail at 406-646-6733.
Did you ever find out who got NarniaPodcast@gmail.com?
I did not. We should email them, though.
Oh, we should just email hey, are you guys using this one still? At this point, we've been doing it for too long. We have to go back and re-record it. I guess we're stuck with this email, aren't we?
Yeah.
Because all the other ones are there.
It's a good email.
If we ever got a website, we couldn't go back and make it at Narnia.com. Sorry. I guess in my fantasy,
we could just retcon it and
true.
say that this is now.
Also, in my
canon.
fantasy just now, it was we now own Narnia.com. I don't know why I went not Narnia podcast, not the Narnia. No, we own Narnia.com is our podcast. It's for some reason.
If we want to own a 6-letter domain name with .com, we're gonna need a lot more patrons.
That's true.
Those are so expensive.
Just
especially Narnia.com.
What about if it was FFGHCT?
You'd be surprised.
Really? That's probably gone?
No, that one's probably available.
Do you, this is silly, but do you own any domain names?
I do. I have 3. I have an old, handle that I used to use that was an anagram of something else, and then I also have my name and then my nickname.com. I bought those super early on.
Oh, like with illustration and stuff?
Yeah.
What's this first one? You kind of went over. You're probably not you're probably not going to say it now. Maybe you'll tell me later. What is this? You had some kind of anagram for your what's that website used for? A handle?
That's a story for another time.
Yeah, see, I knew you weren't going to tell me. Tell me after we stop recording. I'm very intrigued.
And when J.K. Rowling put it in Harry Potter, I thought, I came up with that years ago.
Are you serious? I can't tell if you're joking or not.
It wasn't Tom Marvolo Riddle, but it was something that spelled something.
That's kind of cool.
Yeah.
I don't own any domain names.
Or you should get some.
I should use some. That's fine.
Yeah.
We got to do a website.
It's the real
soon.
estate of the internet.
Well, we're in my house, so I think I own the house that we record in, so your job can be just owning all the domain names. I think we'll call it even. How's that sound?
50-50.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's keep going. Sorry.
We'd also appreciate. I bet people skip this part, but if you're listening to this, send us an email and let us know.
I don't think anybody. Do you think people listen to the very, very end?
I think people start skipping after this episode is made possible.
Do you listen to the end of other people's podcast episodes?
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there are actually some shows that I enjoy the way they talk about the products that they have for sale so much that sometimes I skip the content, listen to that, and then go back and listen to the content.
There's a couple of podcasts I listen to that if they do their ads, like there's a couple that like make fun of it. They make it fun, or they make fun. They either do actually make fun of the product, or they're just being funny. And I'll always listen. And those are the ones I remember.
Yeah.
And then
it's the secret to success.
I have never actually fully listened to an Audible ad. I have Audible already anyway. What's the toothbrush one? There's always
Quip.
I don't think I've ever listened to a Quip ad. Well, I'm just great. Now I just lost them as a sponsor. I guess they'll never come. I know it exists, but as soon as I hear Quip, I'm like, it's fine. I have a toothbrush from Walgreens. I'm fine. I just skip. It sounds like it's a great thing, but I don't always listen to some unless they're funny. But I always wonder if anyone's listening. Maybe people will today because they'll be like, wait, there's 5 minutes left. What happens?
Why is
that?
Or I think that there are a lot of people who listen to it because they can't reach their phone.
Oh, you think so?
Or they just forget, or something happens and they're driving and they're like, I'll just let it go because it'll skip to the next episode or something.
Do we make it too meta when we talk about podcasting on our podcast? Or is it now more meta because I just
now
being
you're
meta?
talking about talking on a podcast.
Have you guys ever seen the TV show Community? I think you might like it.
Yeah, you should check it out. Unless you didn't enjoy this, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. It makes it a lot easier to find the show and stuff.
So I'll finish it off for Phil here. So
I can't breathe.
Yeah, it's okay, buddy. So again, we always appreciate a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find the show and join along on our read through. And also make sure you're subscribed so that every Wednesday, just like Aaron and Hannah, you can wake up and listen to a new episode of the show. And then finally, thank you again for just coming along on this journey. And we'll be back next time with Chapter 9.